My mom works in an office, that's why this one hit hard. This isn't just another story for clicks, it's based on real world face pain people go through. A kind of betrayal that doesn't scream but cut deep. It just hopes someone out there sees and says, wait, that's me, and maybe walks away a little stronger.
I was in the subfloor crawl space rerouting a failing coolant line when Brendan tripped the emergency shutdown. No warning, no alert. Just the sudden thud of silence, racks going dark, fans stilling like a morgue had settled over the entire server hall. I bolted upright, slammed my head on the underside of a conduit, and dragged myself out, face smeared with dust and pipe grease. He stood there at the access panel, grinning like a toddler who just figured out how to flush a phone. Sorry, he said, like we were in a sandbox. Wanted to see how fast the backup would kick in. I didn't say a word. I walked past him, straight to the main terminal, started diagnostics without even looking at him. Because if I had, I might have said something that would have ended everything right then. 13 years. 13 years of rebuilds, vendor escalations, emergency hurricane cutovers, and round-the-clock diagnostics that kept this place from becoming just another rusting corpse in the Texas heat. And this kid, this grinning frat ghost in a Patagonia vest, just hit the kill switch like it was a light show at Burning Man. That was the moment I knew the countdown had started. Not on any timer in the system, but in me. And before we go further, if you're listening and you like stories where karma arrives in a tailored suit with a notarized clause, please take a second to like the video and subscribe. It keeps this kind of story alive and helps the team keep digging up the good ones. Back to it. You see, LancerTech didn't start pretty. When I first came on board, the South Texas site was a flooded mess of old military surplus racks and decade-old diesel backups that sputtered like dying lawnmowers. I was the first one in, last one out, every single day. I slept on site twice during Hurricane Miriam, once in a server room on a yoga mat next to a RAID array that was barely holding temp. But we made it work. Slowly. Quietly. I negotiated better power redundancy. I built vendor trust from scratch. I even got the EPA off our backs when the old Freon tanks nearly triggered a citation. Walter Lang never knew about that one. I handled it, just like I handled everything else. It became my home. Not in the sentimental way, not with photos on the desk or plants by the monitor, but in that sacred steel and code kind of way where you know every inch, every hum, every risk vector by instinct. I didn't need credit. I didn't care about titles. I was the architect, the custodian, the spine. Then, 3 months ago, Walter started calling Brendan our future. It started with harmless jokes in meetings. Hey, Danica, maybe Brendan can shadow you for a bit. See how things tick. Then it was, we should start letting Brendan lead some of the vendor check-ins. And finally, last week, Brendan will be transitioning into a leadership role. He's got great instincts. Great instincts? The same instincts that shut down a data center during peak vendor sync? But I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just made a note in my private log. The inheritance phase has begun. What nobody remembered, what Walter probably hoped I'd forgotten, was that this wasn't a job. It was a contract. A real one. Reviewed by 3 lawyers, negotiated after he begged me to stay when the CTO quit back in 2015. And buried in that contract, nestled beneath a clause about operational autonomy, was a ticking landmine. They thought I was just the tech gal. Quiet, reliable, replaceable. But I've always said, if you're going to treat someone like wallpaper, make sure she's not the one holding the foundation together. So I smiled. I handed Brendan a checklist of weekend maintenance routines he'd never understand. And I waited. Because the funniest thing about people like Walter, they think loyalty and silence mean weakness. They never realize it's strategy. The folder was empty. Just a prop, like I was being handed a participation trophy for 13 years of technical combat. No onboarding checklist, no strategy documents, not even a basic transition outline. Just crisp, white nothing, like my career was a blank page Brendan could scribble his name on. I looked up at Walter. He leaned back in that ridiculous leather chair, the one I helped get moved in during the renovation 5 years ago when he decided the old one made him look tired. His hands were folded across his gut like he was trying to soften the blow with posture. You're serious? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He chuckled. Come on, Danica, you're the best person to get him up to speed. Nobody knows that center like you. So instead of leading the systems I rebuilt, I'm supposed to play tech tutor to your son? His smile didn't crack. Well, Brendan's got fresh ideas. He interned at VexFund last summer, picked up a lot about agile deployment and vertical scaling. He shadowed a DevOps team that managed a dog walking app, I said flatly. Walter raised his hands like that settled the debate. Vision's vision. You've had a good run. Now it's time to pass the torch. I didn't flinch. I just nodded. Slowly. Measured. Then I asked one question. Before we start this little shuffle, have you reviewed all the paperwork your new strategy lead will be leaning on? Contracts, NDAs, infrastructure ownership, licensing, still active, right? His jaw tensed. Just a flicker. Then he waved it off like I was talking about paperclips. It's just tech support now, Danica. Brendan's got the reins. We're not reinventing the wheel here. But that was exactly what he was doing, replacing a mechanic with someone who thought wheels ran on tweets and kombucha. I stood up, smoothed my sleeves, and looked around his office. The framed magazine cover on the wall, the one that called Lancer Tech, the quiet titan of Texas infrastructure. I wrote that press pitch, the strategic client diagram pinned to his corkboard, my layout. Even the timeline Brendan would inevitably try to optimize, built by me, down to the millisecond load balancing. I walked to the door, paused, and looked back. Just don't be surprised when things stop humming, I said. Machines don't care about pedigree, and neither does uptime. He didn't answer. He was already typing something on his phone, probably texting Brendan about how well the meeting went. Outside, the hallway felt colder than usual. Or maybe I was just noticing things differently now. The little details. The way people had stopped asking me for sign-off before deploying patches. The meetings I used to run now shifted to more flexible ownership. One by one, signals were blinking red, but no one was watching the dashboard except me. At my desk, I pulled up a folder labeled Redundancies. It wasn't about code. It was about people. Contacts, contingencies, and the contracts Walter assumed would just fade into obscurity. But nothing fades when it's built on time-stamped precision and notarized triggers. I knew what Clause Say 22C said, and I knew exactly when I'd be invoking it. The hum of the server room was different that morning. Still steady, still reliable, but quieter somehow, like the entire grid was holding its breath. I sat on the cool concrete floor between Rack 7 and the diagnostics panel, coffee growing cold beside me, watching the monitor cycle through system health like it always had. Everything green, every node reporting, every failover cluster in perfect sync. I didn't touch a thing. My laptop sat open, but idle. I didn't run backups, they were already scheduled. I didn't run disconnects. The scripts would handle that when it mattered. I wasn't there to burn the place down. I just needed to breathe in the room one last time. The room I'd given more of myself to than most people give their own kids. At 9:12 a.m., the door swung open. Walter's voice bounced off the tile like he owned the air itself. Danica, you ready to train my boy? I stood slowly, dusted my hands on my jeans, and picked up the sealed envelope I'd placed on the console. Walked past Rack 4, then Rack 2, and met him halfway, just beside the operations table. Brendan was right behind him, carrying a fresh LancerTech company laptop, still in shrink wrap. I handed Walter my badge. Then I placed the envelope on the desk with both hands, lined up the corners, and said, softly but clearly, so the servers would hear too, "No, I'm done." Brendan blinked. Wait, what? Walter furrowed his brow and reached for the envelope. His fingers hesitated at the seal when he saw it. The stamp. Blue ink. Notarized, official, time-stamped. His smirk, God, that smirk, twitched for just a moment. He didn't open it right away. He didn't have to. The only thing more dangerous than an employee who knows her worth is one who prepared her exit like an operations audit. I don't understand, Brendan said, looking from me to his father like we were speaking another language. We just got started. Walter finally peeled back the flap, read the first paragraph, and his eyes snapped up. I'd never seen that look on him before. Not fear, exactly. Not anger. Something colder. Recognition. Because inside that envelope was the one thing he never believed I'd pull. a formal resignation, and the invocation of Clause 22C from my 2015 renegotiated contract. He glanced down the hall like someone might save him from what he was reading, but there was no one coming. No HR rep, no legal buffer, just a climate-controlled hall and a fiber optic spine that ran through concrete I'd personally overseen being poured. "You're serious," he said, voice brittle. "I don't joke about uptime," I said. Brendan tried to laugh nervously. "Okay, well, can we just talk about it? Maybe go over what you think needs to change." "There's nothing to change," I replied, eyes still on Walter. "The change already happened. You made it when you gave him my title." Walter's voice dropped to a whisper. "Danica, this is unnecessary." "No, Walter, you made me unnecessary." I turned and walked out. Didn't clear my desk. There was nothing personal there. Didn't say goodbye, because the only people worth saying goodbye to had already been replaced by consultants and Walter's latest crop of visionaries. I stepped into the elevator, watched the doors close, and exhaled for the first time in months. By 9:28 a.m., I was already gone. And by 10 Sao, legal would be trying and failing to figure out just how enforceable Clause 22C really was. They wouldn't like the answer, but they'd definitely feel it. Back in 2015, Walter had come into the server room in a panic. The regional CTO had quit mid-upgrade, right as we were migrating to a new cooling system and onboarding a federal energy client with a zero downtime clause so strict it made my eyelid twitch. I was already pulling 80-hour weeks, patching around broken firmware with baling wire and caffeine, when Walter cornered me with one question. "You're not thinking of leaving too, are you?" I could have walked then. But instead, I sat him down in the same glass-walled conference room Brendan would eventually call his office and said, "If you want me to stay, we do this by contract. Clean, quiet, legal." He agreed to everything. Clause 22sec wasn't long, just 4 sentences. In the event of any reassignment, role dilution or reduction in authority initiated under a familial restructuring and not due to performance or disciplinary cause, employee reserves the right to exit with immediate effect. This exit shall trigger a full pro rata vesting of outlined equity share as defined in Appendix B, along with a deferred payout calculated by infrastructure continuity benchmarks. Payout to be based on total uptime performance averaged across 5 calendar years, rounded to the nearest fiscal quarter. Clause is irrevocable upon signature. I wrote it. He initialed it. His legal team reviewed and countersigned it. Then we both forgot about it, except I didn't. Because I knew Walter Lang, knew the way he looked at family, at bloodlines, at legacies, as if competence could be inherited through golf lessons and a LinkedIn premium account, so I waited. Built. Documented every protocol. Hard-coded redundancies only I could audit, and I kept the paper trail dry, clean, and time-stamped. Not out of bitterness, out of foresight. Fast forward to the morning I walked out. The moment he opened that envelope and saw the clause triggered, the silence in that room wasn't confusion. It was understanding. He knew. But knowing and accepting are 2 different beasts, because when legal called him an hour later, he didn't answer. He couldn't. There's no version of that conversation where he doesn't lose. No loophole. No interpretation. Clause 22C wasn't vague. It didn't require arbitration. It just activated, automatically. And the number? That clause was worth just under $7.8 million. It wasn't just a payout. It was a verdict. A binding, notarized reminder that you don't gut the engine and expect the car to drive just because your kid learned Excel. By noon, I imagine Walter had paced the entire length of the operations wing at least 10 times. Maybe he barked at Brendan. Maybe he screamed at legal. But none of that changed the fact that his own signature, his own trust in my so-called paperwork skills, just cost him more than he'd ever paid me in salary. I didn't take a penny more than I was owed, but I made sure what I was owed couldn't be debated. You don't have to yell to break a man like Walter. You just have to speak the one language he worships, certified dollars tied to ironclad uptime. Clause 22C wasn't revenge, it was insurance, and it had just been triggered. By midday, Walter had worn a path into the epoxy floor outside my old office. His shirt sleeves were rolled up like that would help him solve anything. Brendan trailed behind him like a kid who brought a Nerf gun to a live fire drill. The servers were still up because I made them that way, but everything else was unraveling and fast. It started with the HVAC sync script for cooling array 2B timed with our load balancer's low peak window. No one could find it. Because I didn't keep it on the public dev repo, it lived in a vault. Password encrypted, keyed to a string of vendor IDs only I managed. Then came the vendor pings. Our main UPS supplier sent a simple email, verifying continuity with Danica before authorizing shipment release. Brendan replied with some garbled nonsense about new leadership vision. The vendor's response? Vision doesn't override contract terms. Next up was the diagnostics server in Rack 3. Brendan tried to run a routine check but couldn't get past the handshake protocol. He asked IT to reset it. IT laughed. That protocol wasn't theirs. It was mine. Custom authenticated through a script that referenced a local hash table tied to my session certificate. No certificate, no access. And then the real emails started. One from a regional manager in the Austin branch. Why was Danica removed without consultation? Followed by another from West Texas Ops. I'm holding deployment until Danica signs off. Per clause. Clause. That word again. That's when Walter, in a panic, finally demanded my personnel file. Not the HR fluff, the one stored under legal's contractual critical personnel archive. He skimmed it for 2 minutes, then shouted for someone to get legal back on the line. The room got quiet. You could practically feel the ambient hum of the data center rise above the silence like a judgmental whisper, because that's when legal found it. Appendix B, subsection 2, clause 22C, right where it had always been, but more importantly, the timer. See, it wasn't just a payout. Clause say 22C came with a 21-day buyout window, 21 calendar days from the moment I resigned. If they didn't settle by then, my vesting clause kicked into full enforceable ownership, no longer deferred. It shifted, automatically, from paper to payable. Walter just stood there, staring at the folder like it might start speaking, like the clause might somehow redact itself if he blinked hard enough. But it didn't. It just sat there. Quiet. Heavy. Expensive. Brendan whispered, "We can fix this, right?" No one answered, because fixing it meant admitting that the entire foundation, everything they'd ignored, underestimated, and casually reassigned, was held together by a woman they'd just replaced with a LinkedIn certificate and an ego in loafers. Every delay cost them. Every deployment frozen. Every vendor stalling for my signature. Every second pulling them closer to that 21-day cliff edge where my exit became a legal landmine. And the worst part? The systems still ran. Because that's how I designed them. Self-sustaining, elegant, foolproof. But nothing in the paperwork was foolproof, and now they were drowning in it. The clause didn't negotiate. It didn't stall. It didn't ask how Walter felt about Brendan's future. It just ticked. 21 days, and every single one was pre-wired with consequences they never saw coming. Day 1 was just disbelief. I imagine Walter still thought I'd come back. Maybe he thought it was a bluff. That I'd crack under the silence. But I'd built too many systems that ran better without noise, including this one. By day 2, vendors started pulling flags. Our data integrity verification partner sent a quiet note, "Pending internal review, SLA renewals are paused." It wasn't a threat. It was a formality, one triggered by the fact that my name had been removed from their contact log without contractual notification. Clause 14C on that side required it, and I had helped write that clause too. Day 3, the licensing vendor for our diagnostic suite froze the renewals queue. Cannot process Tier 1 extensions without Danica M. Lanford's authentication code. The request bounced to Brendan, who had no idea what an authentication grid even was. He pinged support. They asked him one question. "Who holds your escalation credentials?" Brendan's reply? "I think IT does." Wrong answer. IT handled maintenance, not core architecture. That was me. Meanwhile, Walter was scrambling to get a call with legal, but they'd already read the file, already flagged the 21-day timer. Clause 22C wasn't a handshake. It was a ticking mechanism. After the clock expired, I became entitled not just to deferred payout and equity, but to a chain of automatic legal notices that escalated to the Energy Compliance Commission. That's what scared them. Because our cooling arrays weren't just high efficiency, they were subsidized under a state energy optimization grant. And buried inside the grant terms was one lovely line. Compliance audits shall be verified by original systems architect or licensed independent auditor with demonstrated site-specific credentialing. Guess who the only certified verifier was? Day 4 passed without a word. Day 5, things got louder. One of our anchor clients out of Dallas, an insurance conglomerate worth over 80 million in server contracts, sent a short inquiry. Is Danica still on retainer? If not, please confirm backup architecture, sign off credentials by end of day. Walter tried to draft a reply. Legal told him not to send it, because any written confirmation that I was no longer part of the architecture chain would trigger a clause in their contract requiring a third-party review, and likely a hold on all new uploads to their node cluster. Translation: data freeze. That night I checked my email. Nothing from Walter. Nothing from Brendan, just a silent thread from legal, forwarded by my attorney. Subject line: urgent review, clause exposure. I didn't open it. Day 6, my phone rang. Private number, no voicemail transcribed, but I knew who it was. So I did what every calm, calculated professional would do. I downloaded the voicemail and sent it, without listening, to my attorney. Let them decide how to respond. Let them hear Walter's voice crack on the edge of panic. Because this wasn't my fight anymore. It was their clock now, and it was ticking, and I had nothing left to say. By the end of the first week, I was sitting in a clean, quiet office overlooking Holt's West Campus install site. Smaller footprint than LancerTech, but tighter systems, smarter people, and most importantly, no legacy nepotism rotting the core. My new title read, Senior Director of Site Reliability and Expansion. A mouthful, maybe, but it came with one thing LancerTech never offered: respect that didn't need to be earned twice. Holt's CTO, Mara Knoll, didn't ask me to prove myself in 100 meetings. She slid me a whiteboard marker, pointed to a problem on the wall, and said, if you were building this from scratch, what would you do differently? By the time I finished sketching, she said, okay, let's do it that way. No smirks, no suns, just competence. On day 8, Walter finally cracked. Subject line: just a quick chat? He'd gone soft on the phrasing, like we were catching up over coffee and not standing on opposite ends of a multi-million-dollar detonation he started himself. I didn't reply, didn't even open it. I just forwarded it to my attorney, who sent back a beautifully clipped one-liner. Please direct all future communication through counsel. Ms. Lanford is no longer affiliated with your firm. Not Dan. Ms. Lanford. I nearly framed that. Then came the article. Holt's comms team ran a soft piece on our internal blog, picked up within hours by a couple of infrastructure trade sites. It was meant to be a quiet onboarding note, nothing flashy. Just a photo of me, clean shirt, natural light, no staged drama, and a list of credentials. 13-year uptime architect at LancerTech, sub 3.2 ms rollback latency across 5 state regions, 98.7% vendor retention score, 0 compliance violations across 7 audits, architect of the Lang cooling protocol, LCP 47. That last one? Brendan tried to claim he'd designed something similar in a blog post last fall. Didn't matter now, because within 48 hours of that article going live, LancerTech's client support inbox started lighting up like a bad Christmas tree. Is Danica really gone? Who's taking over our SLA diagnostics? Can we get confirmation that she signed off on the latest load balance reports? Does Brendan have credentials to verify continuity? The worst came from that Dallas client. Please advise if a third-party audit is now required. We are pausing all uploads until your internal architecture changes are verified. Walter didn't reply publicly. He couldn't. Not when the investors were watching. Not when every client ping that came through reminded him of the one thing he'd tried to ignore. Reputation doesn't come from press releases. It comes from uptime. And that was mine. Still running. Just not for him anymore. And as for Brendan, I heard through the vendor grapevine that he tried to rerun one of my diagnostic scripts. He opened the file and found a single comment at the top. You can inherit the office, not the knowledge. I didn't write it recently. I wrote it in 2018 because I always knew they'd try. The quarterly board call was supposed to be a formality, one of those safe, airless conference sessions where Walter would puff up about expanding infrastructure capabilities and Brendan would sit 2 chairs down pretending to understand latency reports someone else had written. But this time, there was no puffing. No grinning, just a CFO with pale skin, a tremor in his clicker finger, and 3 slides cued like gravestones. Slide 1. Lanford exit triggered clause 22C. A few board members blinked. A few leaned forward. 1. The investor rep from Kingsdale Holdings spoke first. Clause what? Walter shifted in his chair. Look, it's from a contract she negotiated back in 2015. It was buried under old project files. Legal coughed gently into their mic. It's not buried, it's indexed, tagged, searchable by clause ID. It was recertified during the 2018 contract review cycle. You initialed it, Mr. Lang. The room went quiet, except for the subtle thunk of someone setting down a water bottle harder than necessary. Slide 2. Outstanding liability, 7.8 million. The CFO didn't try to soften it. No caveats, no projected settlements, just the hard, brutal number, $7.8 million, owed, locked, legal, and ticking. The camera caught one of the board members leaning back and crossing her arms. Why wasn't this raised before the transition? Didn't legal flag this clause? Walter rubbed his forehead. Because no one thought she'd walk. It wasn't meant to be used. Another board member, drier than the rest, muttered, "That's not how contracts work, Walter." Slide 3. Vendor hold. Notices 5 active. That one hurt the most. 5 major vendors, 2 logistics, 1 power grid compliance, 1 diagnostic software provider, and 1 data integrity firm had filed formal hold notices citing the absence of my credentials, approvals, or onboarding sign-off. They're stalling? Asked someone incredulous. They're protecting themselves, the CFO replied. Without Danica's active participation or verified successors, their liability doubles. One's already sent preliminary cancellation paperwork. Walter snapped. They're bluffing. They're not, said legal. And you'd know that if you'd read the escalation tiers I submitted 3 days ago. Then came the final blow. An email pinged mid-meeting. Everyone heard it. The CFO opened it live on screen. Subject: Client Acquisition Confirmation, Holt Systems Group. The attachment was a signed contract, $2.4 million, from Oak Ridge Mutual, the same Dallas client who'd paused uploads last week, formerly one of LancerTech's anchor accounts, now Holt's. No one spoke. No one had to. The message was clear. The board didn't just lose a technical lead. They lost their reputation shield, their continuity narrative, their illusion of control. Walter tried to speak, some kind of damage control reflex, but even Brendan looked away. They weren't looking for answers anymore. They were looking for someone to blame. And I wasn't there to absorb the hit. I was 280 miles away, walking a new build site with a cup of coffee and a clipboard that still smelled like dry erase ink and optimism. Turns out, when you build something stable, even your absence leaves a measurable weight. They'd feel it for a long, long time. The badge Holt gave me came in a plain envelope. No fanfare, no glossy welcome kits. Just a matte black card with my name etched in clean white. Danica Lanford, Director. No cutesy acronyms, no mission statement buzzwords, just the truth. It felt heavier than it looked. I clipped it on, stepped into the new site near Abilene, and breathed in the kind of silence you only get in a perfectly tuned server hall. Cool, dry, balanced. No alarms, no hum variances, just calm power. I didn't have to run diagnostics. I could feel the integrity. Meanwhile, over at LancerTech, the updates slowed to a trickle. Walter pushed out a vague press release about internal realignment and future forward restructuring. Classic corporate speak for, we have no idea what we're doing. Brendan, quietly removed from the org chart. No exit memo. No thanks for your contributions post. Just gone. Like a misconfigured patch quietly rolled back in the middle of the night, someone told me he applied to a crypto startup in Austin, apparently listed former infrastructure lead on his resume. A recruiter reached out, asked if I'd endorse the claim. I didn't reply. Because that's the thing about legacy. It isn't built in PowerPoint decks or family titles. It's built in systems that run clean a year after you're gone. In clients that follow your work without ever needing your face on a billboard. In silence that hums instead of screams. I drive past LancerTech sometimes. The building still stands, the lights are still on, but I can always tell when something's off. You can smell heat drift if you've lived with it long enough. You can hear instability in the tone of an airflow regulator. That place hums, but it stutters now. Because it's one thing to inherit a data center, it's another to understand it. Holt never asked me to write a memoir. They just gave me the tools, the autonomy, and the respect I needed to build something better. And I did. Quietly. Precisely. Without legacy handholders or weekend interns wearing Bluetooth headsets they didn't earn. If you ever visit our site and notice the temperature stays at 68.1 degrees on the dot, it's not magic. It's the difference between pretending to lead and knowing how to listen to machines that don't care who your father is. I don't gloat. I don't post war stories. But if you feel the air shift, the hum balance, the silence deepen when you walk through Holt's West Annex, that's mine. And it'll outlast all of them.